Donald Trump attempted to project the image of a conqueror, but within just a few remarks, the entire performance began to unravel. First came the declaration of triumph. Iran, he implied, had been defeated, shattered, and finished. Then came the request. Countries that depend on the Strait of Hormuz, he said, should handle securing the passage with significant assistance from the United States. That is not the language of absolute control. That is the language of a power center realizing in real time that loud bravado is not the same as strategy. And the Strait of Hormuz is not merely an abstract stretch of water on a map. It is a vital artery in the global system. Oil, shipping, insurance, inflation, supply chains, airline expenses, your gas bill, your grocery bill. If that artery tightens, the pressure spreads everywhere. So when the White House narrative shifts from "we already won" to "everyone please help," that is not merely a messaging issue, that is a credibility issue. And credibility is the hidden currency of global influence. Then the second layer arrived. Assertions that partners were joining were met with pushback, indicating some of those partners were far less enthusiastic than Trump suggested. At the same time, an escalating conflict unfolded with media coverage that refused to follow the same script. So now this story is larger than Trump, larger than Iran, larger than a single shipping route. This is about whether the structure surrounding American power is being reinforced or quietly circumvented. In the next few minutes, I will show you exactly what just occurred, why Trump did not see it coming, and why the world you are living in today already looks different from the one you woke up in just days ago. If you had a business partner who insulted your customers, threatened your suppliers, started a confrontation on a loading dock, and then called asking for emergency backup, how long before you stopped taking that call seriously? Keep that thought because that is precisely the question U.S. allies and regional partners are now asking. Leave your answer in the comments. If a leader continues treating allies like disposable tools, at what point do those allies begin building around him instead of with him? Let us rewind the timeline. This did not begin with the Strait of Hormuz. It began with a pattern. Months and months of criticizing allies, imposing tariffs on partners, treating NATO like a protection racket, publicly diminishing countries whose cooperation Washington still relies on, and behaving as though loyalty can be demanded after trust has already been burned to the ground. Trump kept assuming the old system would continue functioning simply because America is powerful enough to force it to work. That was the miscalculation, because while Trump was performing outrage, other capitals were examining their exposure. While he was treating diplomacy like a television segment, other governments were thinking in terms of redundancy, legal space, defensive posture, insurance, energy security, and contingency planning. Europe has been learning to hedge. Gulf states have been learning to hedge. Even media ecosystems have been learning to hedge. When a superpower behaves like an unpredictable contractor instead of a stable anchor, everyone downstream begins drafting alternative blueprints. So when the Strait of Hormuz suddenly moved to the center of the narrative, Trump seemed to expect the old reflex. America calls, others fall in line. But power is not only about who possesses the largest navy, it is also about who still holds the deepest reserve of trust. And on that front, Trump has been draining the tank himself. Now let me walk you through the three receipts because this is where the structure of the story becomes impossible to overlook. Receipt number one is Trump's own message whiplash. Earlier, Trump implied that many countries, particularly those impacted by any attempted closure of the strait, would send warships alongside the United States to keep it open and secure. Later, his tone shifted. Countries that receive oil through the strait, he said, should take care of the passage while the United States would assist greatly. Read those two ideas together and the contradiction becomes obvious. The official framing sounds like coalition language, burden sharing, partnership, global cooperation. Fine. But the plain English version is much harsher. He boasted first and outsourced later. He projected complete dominance, then revealed reliance. He wanted the headline of victory without the responsibility of managing the aftermath. And that matters because in geopolitics, sequencing is everything. If you truly have the situation under control, you do not need to pivot from "we have already destroyed their capability" to "everyone else now needs to step up." That is not a seamless transition. That is a public slip. It signals to adversaries there may be more fragility in the system than the rhetoric admits. It signals to allies the planning may have been thinner than advertised. And it signals to markets that risk is rising faster than slogans can contain it. Trump's supporters will argue that he was simply calling for fair burden sharing. But burden sharing works when the burden was discussed before the crisis, not when the crisis is already unfolding and your partners have spent months being insulted by the same person now requesting help. He declared victory before securing the exit. That silence from the supposed coalition was deafening. Receipt number 2 is the reaction from allies and regional players. One of the most revealing moments came when claims began circulating that foreign partners, including France, would join a more assertive naval operation around the strait. A French rapid response account pushed back, saying there was no such shift and that the carrier group posture remained defensive in the eastern Mediterranean. In plain English, that was a no. Not our mission, not on your terms, not after your improvisation. And notice how unusual that is. Allies do not normally rush to publicly lower expectations unless they want distance on the record. Official language about posture, stability, and defense sounds technical, but what it truly signals is caution. It signals reluctance to be pulled into a mission whose objectives, legal foundation, and end state remain unclear. This connects to a broader pattern. Trump has repeatedly treated Allied support as something he can insult one day and requisition the next. The same instinct appeared when he dismissed the idea of late joining support from close partners in other moments, as though alliance management were a personal loyalty test rather than a long-term strategic asset. But countries remember, governments remember, militaries remember. They remember the tariffs. They remember the threats. They remember the swagger. So when the call arrives during a live crisis, they respond with hedging, not enthusiasm. And the Gulf is watching as well. Regional states may still cooperate with Washington. They may still depend on Washington in significant ways, but dependence is not the same as trust, and trust is not the same as obedience. If you are in Doha, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, or Kuwait, you are asking a harsh question right now. Is the United States still the security guarantor, or is it becoming a destabilizing variable you need protection against? Trump was demanding loyalty from capitals he had already taught not to trust him. Receipt number 3 is the media pressure campaign. As the narrative became more chaotic, Trump turned on the coverage. He attacked major outlets, complained that headlines were misleading, and promoted the idea that the media itself was the problem rather than the contradictions in his own messaging. He also amplified celebratory material, portraying legacy media as weakened, reshaped, or brought to heel. Notice what that reveals. This is not confidence. This is an instinct for control. Then came the regulatory echo around him. Trump allies, including FCC Chair Brendan Carr, have used rhetoric about broadcasters, public interest duties, distortions, and license renewals in ways many critics interpret as attempts to intimidate coverage. The official language is always wrapped in civics, trust, accuracy, and public interest, but the plain meaning is harder to ignore. Tell the story our way, or understand that power can be brought very close to your door. That is a major signal, because when an administration is truly secure, it does not need to threaten the camera. It does not need to frame independent scrutiny as sabotage. It does not need to celebrate a media ecosystem that has been hollowed out and made more compliant. And here is the part Trump world keeps missing. Audiences do not disappear when traditional outlets are weakened. They migrate. They move toward independent media. They look for voices connecting the dots honestly. That is the blind spot in the entire strongman theory of information. You can pressure institutions. You cannot erase curiosity. When the battlefield narrative slips, the next target becomes the messenger. If this story is connecting dots you have not seen assembled anywhere else, you are already ahead of most people watching this unfold. Hit subscribe right now. This is moving faster than any single outlet can track, and you need to be here when the next piece drops. Here at the Midas Touch Network, we will continue covering it honestly. Now step back and observe the contrast because this is where the real strategic lesson lives. Most leaders, when attacked or embarrassed, grow louder. They perform anger. They tweet more aggressively. They issue bigger threats. The smarter actors in this story did something different. They created distance. They used institutions. They used ambiguity. They relied on defensive posture, legal language, and quiet hedging. They did not rush into Trump's improvisation. They reduced their exposure to it. That is the strategist move. And in this case, the strategist is not one sainted leader. It is an entire category of actors learning the same lesson simultaneously. European governments keeping military moves limited, Gulf states exploring de-escalation and self-protection, companies studying shipping risk, insurers recalculating exposure, independent media growing outside the old gatekeepers. Not with missiles, not with slogans, but with networks, with standards, with redundancy. Trump, by contrast, still approaches power like a blunt instrument. He believes force is enough. He believes volume is enough. He believes if he humiliates enough people publicly, they will still rush to him when he needs them privately. But the modern world does not operate that way. While Trump obsesses over domination, others are constructing bypasses. They are opening side channels. They are keeping options available. They are treating Washington as one node within a larger system, not the unquestioned center of gravity. This is the same operating system that has defined Trump for years. Overpromise, underprepare, externalize the cost, demand loyalty after the damage. That may work in a branding exercise. It does not work in a live geopolitical choke point. You do not defeat chaos by joining it. You build a bypass around it. So what does this actually mean for you? It means if you live anywhere affected by energy prices, you are part of this story whether you want to be or not. Shipping disruptions raise insurance premiums. Insurance premiums feed into freight costs. Freight costs ripple through retail, manufacturing, agriculture, aviation, and household budgets. If you work in logistics, finance, energy, or trade, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a headline to you. It is a risk variable that can impact payroll, pricing, and planning. It also means the structure of business decisions may be changing in ways that outlast any single crisis. Once a company reroutes supply chains, diversifies sourcing, changes insurers, or shifts strategic relationships because a political partner appears unstable, it rarely snaps back immediately just because the news cycle cools. The contracts follow the new routes. The investment follows the new routes. The jobs often follow the new routes as well, and they do not automatically return. Now let me give you the 3 scenarios from here. Scenario 1 is a managed reset. Back channels open. A face-saving arrangement emerges. Tensions cool enough for shipping to stabilize and for everyone to claim they defended peace. Trump says he forced burden sharing. Allies say they preserved stability. Markets exhale. But even in this best case, the structural changes remain. Partners have now seen the fragility. They do not forget that. Scenario 2 is the domino realignment. This is where middle powers continue learning from each other, hedge more, diversify more, build regional security arrangements, strengthen alternative networks in energy, finance, diplomacy, and media. The United States remains enormous, still central, still militarily unmatched in many respects, but it is no longer the unquestioned axis around which every other player automatically rotates. The old center stays large. It simply stops being absolute. Scenario 3 is the spiral. This is the scenario nobody wants to say out loud. Trump pushes back harder. More threats, more pressure on allies, more pressure on media, more improvisation around security, more market anxiety, more forced choices for governments that do not want to choose. This is how fragmentation deepens, not all at once, but through a series of shocks that teach every actor in the system to trust the old architecture a little less each time. And that is the final frame here. Whatever happens next, this relationship between Trump's version of American power and the rest of the network will never be exactly the same again. Even if this specific crisis cools tomorrow, the lesson has already been learned. You never place all your strategic eggs in a single basket. Once alternatives are created, they do not disappear. They become the new normal. Trump did not invent every pressure point in the Middle East, but he is very skilled at taking unstable systems and making them more volatile. The countries now hedging against Washington did not begin this entire story, but they are becoming very skilled at surviving it. So here are the big questions. Did Trump reveal weakness in America's partners? Or did he reveal the limits of his own method? Is this smart self-protection by allies and regional players, or the early stage of a far more dangerous fracture? And if the world is already building around Trump's unpredictability, what exactly remains of the old claim that only he projects strength? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe because the next chapter, whether it is naval posture, Gulf realignment, media pressure, or the price shock that hits consumers next, is coming fast. This story is not slowing down. Do not look away. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making decisions.